Hi, friends, and a very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you wherever and whenever you may be. This is Think Inclusive. I'm Tim Villegas. Sometimes you need to pivot, and today I'm pivoting with my podcast production. For those of you watching on YouTube, you are seeing a static image of me with my voice in the background. And that's because with the short week and 3 additional episodes to produce, I'm running out of time to get everything done. Recording and editing video intros and outros take up a considerable amount of time. And so for the last few episodes, I'm going to do a bit of a hybrid production where I use a static image along with the video interview. I know this is probably a bigger deal to me than it is to you because you can access these episodes anytime you want on either a podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. So why am I bringing it up? Tim, you could have just produced these episodes on your own timetable, your own way, and no one would even know. Here is why I think it is useful to talk about this. As a teacher, sometimes you have to pivot. You run out of time with a lesson, you have to change the assignment, or you have to change a strategy because you realize you aren't reaching a particular student or group of students, or you realize this lesson isn't good enough and you have to start over. Here is me telling you that pivoting, even in the middle of something, is okay. It's part of the process of being a reflective educator. So I guess I'm trying to model that. Change is inevitable, and it's all going to be okay. This week, my guest is Loui Lord Nelson, author of Design and Deliver. We will discuss universal design for learning and how you know if you are actually implementing it. More about Loui right after this break. Welcome back to Think Inclusive from the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education. Each week, we bring you conversations about inclusive education and what inclusion looks like in the real world. This week, my guest is Loui Lord Nelson, an internationally recognized universal design for learning leader, best-selling author, and podcaster. A former special education teacher, Loui led UDL implementation at the district level, was awarded her postdoc by CAST, has influenced change at the national level, and has helped shift mindsets across the globe. Loui has worked with educators across the U.S., Africa, Australia, Asia, Canada, and Europe, and recently completed work with USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and implementing partners to clarify their application of UDL across low and middle income settings. Our topic this week: how do you know if you are really implementing UDL? Before we get into my conversation with Loui, I want to tell you about our sponsor for this week and the entire month of June, the Described and Captioned Media Program. DCMP is the nation's leading source of accessible educational videos. Membership is free for families and school personnel with at least one early learner through grade 12 student with a disability, and it includes free access to thousands of videos and educational television series with captions, audio description, and American Sign Language. DCMP also provides guidelines for captioning and describing educational media, as well as professional development and e-learning resources. DCMP is fully funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and did I mention its services are free? Check them out at dcmp.org. And now, my conversation with Loui Lord Nelson. Oh, and for free time this week, I'm going to preview a bonus episode that will drop later in the month. Loui Lord Nelson, welcome to the Think Inclusive podcast.
Thank you, Tim, very much. I appreciate it.
Loui, I did not prep you for this, but you have such an interesting name. Do you ever talk about your name?
I do. I can.
I would like to know.
Sure. That's fine. So we'll start with the Loui part. My formal name is Louise. It's Louise. And the day I was born, I was nicknamed Loui by a relative. And I kept that. Somewhere in school, I think they decided I was Louise until I was in third grade. And then I put the stake in the ground and said, no, I'm Loui. And I spelled it Loui. I chose that. That was me. Lord, maiden name. And it's very important to me in that I'm the end of this trail of the tree. So my parents had 2 daughters. I'm the second. And so that branch of the tree ends. And so I thought, I really want to keep that within how things go. In addition, though, the teachers with whom I taught all called me Loui Lord. That's just what I was called in the building. And so when I said, well, I was getting married, they were like, you can't drop Loui Lord. And I was like, well, I can be Loui Lord Nelson. And they were like, yes. It was my popular demand within my school. But otherwise, it's true. Yeah. I really wanted Lord to be announced. It's important to me.
Absolutely. It does roll off the tongue very nicely. Loui Lord Nelson.
It does.
It sounds really nice.
Yeah. And as I tell people, though, I'm the only one. And so I can't do anything nefarious. I can't. I can't hide. So Loui Lord Nelson, it's only me. So this is, I cannot, I really can't do anything messy. I don't want to, but anyway.
Right. Okay.
And then all of my friends from either England or French Canadian or the French, they're like, Lord Nelson. You're like, they think I'm related to Horatio. And then I have to say, no, I didn't lose. There's nobody in my history that lost an arm during an admiral.
That is hilarious. Okay. Well, I know I put you on the spot, so thank you for being a good sport there. Well, okay. So speaking of Loui Lord Nelson being in print, it's actually on the book that I have right next to me, Design and Deliver, 2nd edition, published by Brooks Publishing, which is actually one of our sponsors for this season. So thanks, Brooks. This is a great book. And in the book, it's about planning and teaching and using universal design for learning, but you describe UDL as a buffet, which I thought was really interesting, a really interesting way to think about it, where the learner is the customer. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could expound on that for us. Like, what's the best way for educators to think about designing lessons, and how does the buffet fit into that?
Right. So within universal design for learning, that design thinking is what drives us. And design thinking, first and foremost, is focused on the customer. It's focused on the user. It's focused on, those individuals that are coming to that, whatever that product is. Well, in the education world, that's our customers, our learners. And that's any learner. So whether you're a superintendent and you're designing board meetings or designing meetings for your staff, or you're a teacher in a classroom and you're designing for your learners that are coming in, that are younger, that's where that focus is. So then the next step back, of course, is to think about within that buffet analogy is what all is going to be involved in that buffet. The downside of that analogy is that sometimes people will get overwhelmed and they'll think, they'll picture a buffet and think, oh my gosh, I can't do that every single lesson. There are many others that have used this analogy for many years. it's not owned by anybody. I just want to make that clear. But the part of the analogy that's the stopper for people, like I said, is that they get, oh my gosh, how can I do all of this? Well, you think more about your environment, and then you also think about your lessons. But the more that we do in the environment, the more we design up front, the more flexibility we have in that environment, the more we can offer to our learners, the more of that buffet that can be there. I am going to flip to the lesson side, though, because I want to talk about, if it's okay, some dynamics that teachers face. So
Absolutely.
We know that there are a lot of teachers that are in districts, classrooms, on teams where the curriculum is provided to them. And that curriculum is a really tight curriculum. And in fact, they're asked to teach one of those lessons a day. And they're supposed to get through X number of lessons in a month, X number of lessons in a unit. And that is intended to march them toward whatever their state assessment is. And this is a reality that many, many of our educators are experiencing. And so then when they hear about the buffet, there is an instant clash, right? How do I provide choice when I'm told that I need to stick with what's written in my teacher guide, and I'm not seeing where that is? Add to that layer that when a teacher receives a new curriculum, there's a lot of time spent learning that curriculum, just even learning how to deliver that. So where do we find grace and space? And that, again, goes to your learning environment. And so you're looking at those guidelines, and I know we're going to talk about that more later, but you're using that as a way to think about just how your students are coming into your environment, how you're making those resources available to them, how you manage that classroom, how you physically set up that classroom, those relationships that you have. All of those things are so incredibly impactful. So for my colleagues who feel like they're really more locked in toward that end, just want to express that part that's so critical for them to feel like, oh, okay, I can enter this framework. I can think about the buffet. I'm just thinking about my learning environment. And then for our colleagues who have, like, the other end, where they have more flexibility, because there are plenty of classrooms where teachers really have that. They have the set of state standards or benchmarks, and they're expected to collect their resources. They're expected to design from the ground up. And so then they have more flexibility in that area of choosing the layers of resources, the layers of strategies that they're going to use. And so then their buffet is probably going to look a little bit more expansive when it comes to the lesson design. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and also just based on the learners that they have in that environment as well. Because what I'm hearing you say is, if the learner is the customer, we have to get to know our customers. We have to get to know our learners in order to know what kind of environment we're really designing, right?
Yeah, it's true. So we get to know them. We also have that wonderful thing of learner variability. So there's really not an audience out there in the world, literally, because I get to go around the world, where I can ask the question of how many of your learners are reading below grade level. There's not an audience out there that doesn't raise their hand unless they're in some extraordinary setting. And there are other types of barriers that I can mention. And when I say the barriers, but saying that the curriculum, where's the gap? Is there a gap between what your learners experience and how the curriculum is designed? Where's that gap? And so you have that variability that you can anticipate, but then also, as you were saying, we have learners, all of our learners, we want to get to know. And so we plan for that. I really appreciate there's a design cycle that Kavita Rao and Grace Mayo created way back in 2016. And over time, Kavita's had opportunities to upgrade that and upgrade that. And so it's in the second edition, and she's slightly tweaked it since then. And I really feel like this design cycle takes into account what we're talking about here. So regardless of what kind of curriculum you have, a curriculum experience you have, you need to identify the goal. You need to know what your learners are supposed to work toward. And that's part of design thinking. That's where you're going. What do they need? What skill do they need to walk away with? What experiences do they need to walk away having? What knowledge are they supposed to gain? The next part of that is considering the learner variability. And that's where you're saying, oh, okay, what are the barriers that my learners are likely going to experience on the way to that goal? And then, what are their preferences? What support needs do they have? And meeting those. And then the third step to that is designing those assessments, which sometimes sounds surprising to people because they're like, wait, is it an assessment like at the end? Well, first of all, we have formative assessments. Yay, we need those. Please do them. And that helps us check our way, check ourselves as we're going on our way through the lesson or the unit. But the tight connection between goal and assessment, right? So ensuring that what you're assessing is related to the goal. It's not just kind of smattered out there. And then, of course, your summative assessments. So ensuring that those are going to align. After that, then you're looking at those methods and materials. That's where we're really looking at those guidelines. We're then implementing that. And then the final part of that design cycle, which really happens throughout, but is articulated at this point, is reflection.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. That's one of my favorite words, actually.
Reflect and revise, I should say, is that final step that they have, which I think is where you were going too. Reflection has been such a crucial part of our experience. So what kind of lessons did you learn through reflection? I'm just curious.
How much time do we have? I think it was, in general, reflection was instilled in me in my teacher education program as something that, as an educator, does at certain points of the year, but especially in between school years, and to always think about how to improve your craft, maybe focus on one area to improve on. So that was just something that was so beneficial to me, and so that's all.
Do you know what I had to learn was the difference between reflection and self-blame? Because I would, whatever I was a special educator all the way through, and I was a collaborative special educator. So I was working alongside my general education peers. Sometimes we were co-planning. Most of the time we weren't. We didn't get to that point until later on in my career of being in the classroom. And it was really easy for me during reflection to do more of this. Oh, I should have done this or that, and carrying the weight, the burden of not having done it correctly versus putting the energy into revising and improvement. So there's the moment of, I wish I would have done that better, but then springboarding more quickly into what are potential solutions. And there are multiple dimensions for that. But I have to say that I see that in a lot of the professionals with whom I work that are younger in the profession. So maybe it's part of the growth cycle for most educators, but it's always my desire to help people move from that, because I know that I rode that horse maybe a little longer than I needed to. I would always get around to the revision, but boy, it was painful along the way. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that painful. It really doesn't.
Right. Right. Exactly. Like you said before, where's the space for grace, right? You really have to give that grace to yourself as educators.
Yeah.
We briefly mentioned the UDL guidelines. So if you are new to this idea of universal design for learning, there is a fantastic visual representation, kind of like a graphic organizer, and it's on the CAST website. It's udlguidelines.cast.org. And as I'm looking at the webpage, it's saying that there's UDL 3.0 coming.
Yes.
UDL guidelines 3.0 coming. So I'm not sure what that is going to look like, but if you're new to UDL and you're new to the multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression, this is a nice kind of really large view of what it means when we're talking about UDL. And I purposely did not start our conversation here because a lot of people already do know what UDL is. But if you're like, I don't, this is a great conversation, but I have no reference. This would be what we're talking about here. And they're wonderful. But because they are so kind of the big picture, how do teachers know if they're actually implementing the guidelines, implementing UDL?
Yeah. The information in the guidelines and that graphic organizer is exactly what I call it. It's really dense. It's really thick. And there's so many directions that you can go within each of those guidelines. And then what are currently called the checkpoints, which are those little dots within each of the 9 boxes. Honestly, to me, this is a discussion that wavers between external validation and internal reflection. So, knowing whether or not you are implementing the guidelines, you've got both ends there. I prefer when educators are given the time and the space to learn deeply about the guidelines, and even within the checkpoints, so that they can do that internal reflection and are able to say, even if we just talk about the guideline of self-regulation. So currently in the 2.0, that's the upper left-hand corner under engagement. And if teachers become familiar with what those things mean, what that means, that they can do their own reflection of, where did I help my learners have that self-regulation today? I'm sorry, I said the upper left-hand corner. I meant the lower left-hand corner. Where did I help them gain more coping skills? Where did I help them express those coping mechanisms? And that to me is more powerful than having somebody else come into your classroom. That's a model that many of us use. I'm asked to use it when I visit districts and classrooms. But I'll tell you, the hard part there is that I'm trying to guess what's inside the teacher's head. What their intention was, what their plan was for using this. And so for me to look for proof is not the right way to go. For me to identify what actions I'm seeing, and then to have a conversation with the teacher later on about what their intention was, that gets back to the design aspect. So what was your intent with this activity? What was your intent with that student feedback? What was your intent with the physical design of your classroom? What was the intent of having that group of students work with one another? What was your intent with having that pull-out activity? See what I'm saying? So once you can have that conversation about intent, and if you're talking about UDL and everybody is becoming more familiar with the language, then someone can say, oh, well, I was hoping that my students would have some experiences working on coping mechanisms, for that example. Or if let's say we're talking about the guideline of comprehension, which is under representation, again at the very bottom. Oh, I wanted to provide many different opportunities for my students to comprehend that information. So if I'm visiting a classroom and talking with a teacher and they said, oh, I really wanted to use the guideline of comprehension. That's what my intent was. I really wanted to help my students comprehend this information for a science project, let's say. And so in effort of that, this educator provided video options and text to speech options and buddy options. And so, we have the menu, we have the buffet, right? And so had I just observed this, I would see those, but I wouldn't know that maybe necessarily that teacher was really focused on comprehension, because the beauty of the UDL guidelines is that possibly that educator was also focused on, or primarily focused on, sustaining effort and persistence, and thought, okay, if I give these different options, then I'm going to help my students practice those skills of sustaining effort and persistence. Now, the deal is you could be doing both, and you could be doing multiple things with having those options provided, but it's understanding the intent. And so when I have that conversation with the educator and we're able to talk about that intent, then we can discuss, okay, what barriers did the learners maybe still experience, or what barriers did we not anticipate with that design? So you came in with that intent, you came in with these materials and methods, and then that reflection part, were there barriers that were still experienced by the learners? And so that next time we go around and we use those same methods and materials, that we could mitigate those barriers that showed up in this lesson.
Yeah. It's so, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right. It's more about being aware of the guidelines. It sounds like aware of the guidelines. And when you're planning, to keep those in mind. And sometimes you're going to focus on one aspect of the guidelines, and another time you're going to focus on another one. So it's not about hitting all of them all at once. Exactly. They're just more of a support in your planning and in your design. Am I getting it right?
You are getting it so right, Tim. Yes. And so we know that the guidelines are never check boxes. Oh, I did this one, I did this one, I did this one, I did this one. But rather it's saying, I'm going to focus in on, because I know the goal of my lesson. I know the barriers that my students tend to experience. So I'm going to focus in on whatever those guidelines are. Now, I will say that for our friends that are more experienced with the guidelines and have learned about them and know them well, and have over time built them into their environments, that's why you have such rich learning experiences, because they are pretty much tapping into almost every guideline each day, because so much is embedded already into the learning environment. And that's part of the misnomer. People think, oh, I've got to put them into every lesson. Well, oh my gosh. Then you're trying to think about all these different guidelines. And with it, no. We really want to think about that learning environment.
Yeah. I think it's really easy. I can understand why people can get overwhelmed, and it's not like it's not like the guidelines are, they're high. They kind of expect a lot out of the teacher, like when you look at the guidelines, you're like, oh my gosh, this is great. This is wonderful, but I don't know if I can do all this. Right. But I think if somehow we need to let teachers know to take the pressure off, and it's more of like a lens that you're looking through what you're designing, as opposed to, like you said, the check boxes, right? That's not the point of the guidelines. The guidelines aren't someone with a clipboard in the back making sure you do all of them.
Right. So the point of UDL, and I'm speaking within the language of the 2.0 guidelines, because as you said, there are 3.0 that are coming out, and none of us know exactly what those are going to look like. We've had opportunities to give feedback and input, which is exciting and wonderful, and I'm so glad Cass did that. So, but for right now, I'm going to speak to the 2.0. At the very bottom of those guidelines, if people do bring up the CAS guidelines, UDL guidelines, then they will see at that very bottom row are the words purposeful, motivated, knowledgeable, resourceful, strategic, and goal-directed. That's where we're taking our learners. That's the reason why we're using those guidelines, is to help learners experience opportunities, experience challenges, experience choice that lead them toward understanding, so that anytime they're learning, anytime in life, they're able to go, even if it's something they don't want to do, they're able to go, oh, okay, I can identify a purpose in this. And I know how to keep myself motivated to make it through this. So then the next representation, I know how to find the resources that I need for this activity in this moment. And I understand what knowledge I'm supposed to take in so that I'm successful and can meet that goal. And then, when I look at that goal, this learning thing that I need to do, I can strategize what I need to do to make sure I can meet that goal. And I know how to maintain those practices to make sure that I'm goal driven. I mean, everybody needs that in the workforce, but we all need to learn those skills and attitudes that help us become purposeful, motivated, knowledgeable, resourceful, strategic, and goal-directed.
Yeah. This is, wonderful. So you said you were a special education teacher, special educator, and a collaborative one. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the amount of time that educators should be dedicating and to, designing lessons, but also learning the guidelines, learning, principles of universal design for learning. It's hard. It's hard, especially right now with teacher shortages and general fatigue, being an educator and a school administrator. Have you found any tips, or do you have any advice for educators who are looking about how to find time to collaborate, how to or an administrator, how to fit that into the master schedule?
Yeah, so finding time to collaborate, and you hit the two words, master schedule, and it's that it is crucial. And when we, as from the administrator point of view and from that side, structuring the day so that your educators have that time to meet is crucial. I will say also that, for example, I was working with some teachers a few weeks ago, and in their district, they were specials teachers. So music, art. Okay. And one of the discussions that we had was that they weren't really informed of shifts that were made to, let's say, behavior plans, or even IEPs, or even just daily structures for learners. And so they would come into the specials arena, and when they were expecting to sign off on a student check-in, check-out form or something like that, they didn't have that information. And the students were like, oh, I don't have that form anymore. And then it's like, oh, wait. So, your master schedule doesn't always provide room for, let's say, general educators to meet with specials teachers. And so you have to create other communication platforms that are predictable and what I call tight, meaning everybody knows what the purpose of that communication channel is, and they understand how to use it effectively and efficiently. So in some buildings, that's email. And everybody knows that the subject line is going to be whatever this is, share out for the week, whatever the phrase is. And everybody knows that that's what that email is. And they know that they're going to get that information in that email. And in other buildings, it's an internal management system where they trade that information. In other buildings, it's face-to-face conversations, but we know how rare that is for timing. So I've seen multiple structures, but what I can tell you is that the best structures are well-defined. And again, they're tight so that, everybody gets so many emails. And so to sift through all of them to look for that information is hard. But when you know that that certain subject line comes up, you can read that and you're going to get your update that's necessary. For the planning time, then it goes back to a structure that everyone agrees upon and respects, because time is so limited and stories are valuable, but sometimes we need to tighten our stories so that we're getting the critical information that's going to be shared. And so part of defining what that information is going to be is I always ask that it's strengths-based, strengths-based and detailed. And so if you're going to need to share, so for example, I couldn't be in every general education classroom, right? That doesn't work. Can't be 15 Louis because I was partnered with 15 different general educators. But what they could do is provide me information about the learner, but in a strengths-based way. So, and that came in a way of student X tried this, and this is where student X was successful, and this is where student X needed some more support, right? Instead of saying, oh, student X, going down the negative road, right? So when I hear, oh, this did work, I can build on that, and then I can build up supports for the other pieces. When it comes to the other part of your question with the planning time and knowing the guidelines, this is why so many of us really hope to help people find. I always say, once you get a general overview of those 9 guidelines, there's going to be one of them. Typically, there are people like, oh, it like sits well with them. Maybe they feel already kind of accomplished with it. Already they've been like, oh, I do some things that are related to that. Okay, that feels good. But what people cannot do is go, oh, I already do that. Because that means you're done, and we're never done. We're never done. We're never done. I am still trying to identify purpose in certain things that I have to learn as an adult, right? So I'm still building that skill for our learners.
Yeah, right. Yes.
So diving into the guideline, getting more and more examples, having more conversations about them. But if you sit with one guideline for an entire semester, that's great. That is great. If you're just become so practiced with that guideline, because again, that graphic organizer, those guidelines are based on how our brain learns, and our brain is interconnected. So all those guidelines are interconnected. So inevitably, you're going to connect with other things too. And that's the wonderful, beautiful part about UDL. And so with the time, what I would prefer is that somebody's willing to say, this is where I want to focus. This is where I want to commit. And I can stay within this safe bubble and continue to dig deeper, but stay here rather than feel frazzled and spending my time looking for things, looking for resources related to all these different guidelines, but instead stay narrow. And then what that does for your planning time is, when we're talking about lesson planning and you've determined your goal and you start thinking about your assessments. Oh, does this guideline fit with my assessment? It will. But how? How does it fit within those assessments that I'm designing? Oh, how does it fit with the methods and materials that I'm bringing into this lesson? If it's environment, how does that particular guideline fit with the environment that I'm creating daily for my learners.
Yeah, I think that this is very doable if you don't get too overwhelmed by but just by the guidelines itself, or just by thinking about UDL and thinking about it as an add-on as opposed to a support, right? I think especially for educators who maybe are hearing from either administrators or coaches, they're saying utilize the guidelines, utilize UDL, and educators are thinking, but I already do so much. I'm adding on to it, but it's not about that. It's actually enhancing what you're already doing and digging deeper into that planning process.
It's learning to think differently. And that's the brain stretch. That is the brain stretch. And when I say it's about learning differently, the majority of us came through a very different educational system. And it's that system that we mirror in our classrooms even today. And so that's why UDL can feel like such a stretch for people, is because it asks you to think differently. It asks you to approach planning differently. It asks you to approach instruction differently. It asks you to approach your learners differently. It asks you to approach pretty much everything differently. And that's why you have to click into your own executive functioning and say, okay, if I feel myself getting overwhelmed, I'm going to just find my center point. We all know that it works best if we can do that collaboratively with somebody else. So if your teaching team, your collaborative partner, maybe your grade level is going to focus in on something, that's always best, because then you can have those collaborative exchanges and conversations, and everybody's heading down a road together. So that's another piece that I've always seen works best when schools or teams are going to adopt this. If you're going solo, then I really do say, as you've done your review of the guidelines, you've listened to different things about the guidelines, then you find where you feel safe, secure, and I can take this step. I can start to think differently with this one.
Loui, you have a lot of resources to support people. You have Design Deliver, but I'm assuming there's other ones that that are not on top of my mind. But where can people find your resources and find you if they want to know more about UDL?
Well, I appreciate that. So my website is theudlapproach.com. So all one word, theudlapproach.com. So there I do have other books that I've written about universal design for learning, but I think the most accessible piece is that I do host a podcast myself, and it's called UDL in 15 minutes. And so in a short 15 minutes, when you're folding clothes or washing dishes or walking your dog outside, you can listen to folks share their stories about their work with universal design for learning. I'm constantly inspired by what my guests discuss. And I think I'm at 119 episodes, maybe 120 coming up soon. And so they're from all over the world, and folks tucked into corners. I have an interview with someone from Syria, for example, and how they're using UDL within a country that has been in war for well over 12 years. And
unbelievable.
And so, and how they have been empowered by the framework. And then I just get so excited about the different educators that I have. So those are there. There's typically a blog that's associated with them. There's always a transcript. I create a YouTube that has I call a video montage. So the educator that I've interviewed sends in photos, images. And so the YouTube is kind of a slideshow of those, but then I also have audio descriptions if they want to have that. And then I have just other resources that are on there, videos, whatnot, interviews, those things. And so folks are welcome to go there, and you can contact me through the email that's on the website or the contact form.
UDLapproach.com.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. All right, Loui, are you ready for the mystery question?
Oh my gosh, I don't know, but we'll try.
Let's do it. This has been one of my favorite things to do with my guests. So we're just going to keep on doing it. All right. The top one is, what's the last thing you've done that you were really proud of? Let's see if I can get it to focus on that. There we go. What's the last thing that you've done that you were really proud of?
Oh, I'll sort through, because I'm happy to say I'm proud of different things. But okay, so we have a sump pump discharge out the front of our house. We live on a hill, and that discharge has been the bane of my existence and ugly. And so I, through the process of lots of reading and watching different YouTube videos, figured out how to engineer and create essentially a dry creek. And so that took a lot of physical activity, but a lot of planning, some good math, and it's turned out really well. So I'm very proud of that.
Excellent. That's great. You can learn. I mean, there's so much you can learn on YouTube. It is unbelievable.
That's my go-to place.
I know. This is not what I'm proud of necessarily. I mean, I'll get to that in a second, but this is not a plug for YouTube either. But it's like I'm finding myself more and more, like if I'm sitting down and like eating, because I eat lunch, whatever. And I pull up YouTube and I'm like, what do I want to learn today?
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've learned so much, especially with audio and video production. Like that's kind of what I'm consuming right now. But okay, so the thing I'm really proud of, not the most, but really proud of, right, is I just started playing pickleball with a friend of mine, and I used to play tennis a long time ago. And so a buddy of mine is like, hey, there's this community pickleball league. Do you want to join? And I was like, I don't know how to play. And he says, neither do I. and so I'm like, okay, let's do it. And so for the first 6 or 7 games, we were absolutely awful. Like we had not won a game. Okay. But this last weekend, we played a team that we had already played and lost to them. And we played so good. And we got our first win a couple weekends ago. And this upcoming weekend is our pickleball tournament. I don't expect us to go far, but I learned a lot and I'm actually having a lot of fun. It was not fun losing. It's not. It is not fun losing. Okay. Just put that out there. But we did win a game, and I'm very proud of that.
That's excellent. I grew up as a tennis player, so we had a really big, the National Junior Tennis League, which was the Arthur Ashe League. That was very popular in my area, and I played tennis for years. And so I have looked at pickleball, and I've been like, I wonder if I'm going to be able to transfer and generalize, which is in UDL, those skills to pickleball.
Well, it's I think I've used more of my ping pong skills than I do my tennis skills.
I would say that's true. That I can see that.
But it is fun. I'm glad I did it. We had to slog through, but again, it's so I will continue to play pickleball. I probably won't be signing up for any more leagues anytime soon, but I am enjoying playing. So, Loui Lord Nelson, thank you so much for spending some time with me on the Think Inclusive podcast.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
That chime means it's free time. This week, I wanted to preview a bonus episode that will drop next week sometime, not exactly sure when. I don't know if you've heard the story of Ashlyn Rich, a young woman who happens to have Down syndrome that was excluded from fully participating in her high school graduation ceremony. She and her classmates, they were in a segregated disability-specific special education classroom for students with intellectual disabilities. They were kept in a hallway during the ceremony. And after going up on stage to shake hands and get diplomas, they were escorted out of the building and were not permitted to stay and sit with their peers. This story got national attention and a resolution that the family wanted. For the bonus episode, I interview Ashlyn and her mother, Linda, about the experience, and that's going to be next week. Very much looking forward to bringing you that conversation. All right, that is it for this episode of Think Inclusive. Think Inclusive was written, edited, designed, mixed, and mastered by me, Tim Villegas, and is a production of the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education. Original music by Miles Credich. Additional music from Melody. Thanks to our sponsor this week, the Described and Captioned Media Program. Learn more at dcmp.org. Only a few more episodes of Season 11 before we take some time off for the summer. Over 140 episodes are available to you to catch up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so check them out. Thanks for your time and attention, and remember, inclusion always works. From MCIE.